Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Katie Jarrett, Product Manager for My Vision Express. Dr. Chu joins me today to discuss how using patient experiences can improve profitability. If any questions come up during the webinar, please go ahead and type them in the chat box. And if we don't get a chance to answer your question during the webinar, we will reach out to you after the webinar is complete. Dr. Brian Chu owns and directs referral-based keratoconus and scleral lens clinic at Revision Optometry in San Diego. He earned his optometric degree at UC Berkeley in 1999 and subsequently completed a fellowship in the Corneal External Disease Division at Jules Stein Eye Institute, UCLA School of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Chu.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you also for all the attendees for taking time out to join this program.
So to start, Dr. Chu, why would you say profitability is important for the eye care practice?
Right, I think as a foundational thing, we need to kind of establish why profitability is actually a virtuous endeavor. There is some narrative, and certainly, after graduating optometry school, I felt that profiting is kind of like a bad sort of endeavor. But really what it comes down to as a business owner, we need to make sure that our practices are profitable, not only to give the very best care for our patients, to be able to invest in new technology, OCTs and retinal imaging and what have you, to give desired outcomes to our patients, but also to hire and retain the very best staff, which is increasingly a challenge now with the Great Resignation, as it's called. And finally, for our patients that really like our practices, to continue providing a sustained level of quality service and care. If they refer their friends, their family, their coworkers to us, we still need to be around in a year, 2, 3+ years to provide kind of a lifetime of eye care for them. So this is distinctly different from profiteering, which is kind of the unmatched profiting relative to the amount of capital outlay and risk. And kind of the poster child of profiteering, some of you guys, Katie, maybe you've heard the name Martin Shkreli before. Does that ring a bell?
No, not Martin.
You might know his moniker. He goes by Pharma Bro. He's a former CEO of a pharma company who took over the intellectual property of the drug pyrithamine, which is used for vulnerable women during pregnancy and the immunocompromised with HIV that are at risk for toxoplasmosis. And he hiked the price of a dose from like $13 to $750. That's profiteering. That's a completely different thing. So we're talking about profit motive, which is virtuous, and in fact, to run a business to be able to take business deductions, IRS requires that a business has profit motive. So this whole thing of profit motive, it is important now, especially as it's been exposed by COVID, because last March, most optometric practices, myself included, we were closed for a couple months, and upon reopening, we were capacity constrained. We only had a limited number of appointments and too much demand, and things got interesting because as a physical business where we're seeing patients, we slowed down our schedules. We had increased burdens for disinfection and physical distancing, purchasing PPE. So if somebody no-showed or rescheduled at the last minute, or they decided that they don't want to buy any product from our practice, it became a lot more expensive. So the game is to select and preemptively target the patients and get them on the books, the ones that are going to support the business and are needy. And the extension is that why not apply that same principle across the board, not only during the occasion of reopening, but on a regular basis. So that's kind of, I think, the emphasis of this discussion. And the thesis is that the patient experience, we can capture information about the patient experience in an electronic format, whether the practice management software, patient communication software, the electronic medical records, and we can do some analytics of that captured data to help in running the business. And this is kind of similar to, in the world of professional sports, how statistics are now used to drive strategy. It's completely revitalized the the 3-point shot in the NBA. And if we don't do it, I guarantee you that the big private equities, the consolidators, and the online entities that sell glasses and contacts, they're already doing it, and they're going to take over everything that is, we're as practitioners leaving on the table, so to speak.
Yep, definitely agree with that. How do you feel that EMR helps with profitability?
Yeah, so I think historically EMR, 10 plus years ago, most practices that adopted it, it was to meet the meaningful use criteria. And if you didn't have meaningful use, you lost the incentive payments for reimbursement, and now they're penalties. And it's kind of complicated to count the exam elements for a history exam elements and medical decision making. So, that has all kind of now evolved to the point where electronic medical records clinicians, our demands, we're looking more at efficiency of reducing the number of mouse clicks and features that are intuitive, such as kind of auto-suggesting when you're typing in the name of the medication, kind of like the Google auto-suggest, even if we don't have the right typing, the name that it populates at the top, our most likely selection for our staff if they're entering in the street address, the mailing address for the patient, that it may cross-reference in real time with the U.S. Postal Service CAS system, so it formats things and saves time. But now I think these electronic systems, not just EMR, but patient communication software and ability to analyze, we're looking more at these higher order analytics of data that can drive profitability and efficiency. So looking at metrics that go beyond just capture rate, beyond collections per patient, but there are specific areas that we can actually drive, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
So leading into that, we do have a poll question. I'm going to go ahead and launch. If everybody can just take a quick moment, it is about the EMR systems. And if you could answer, do you have an electronic system which readily identifies your most profitable clients? So I'll go ahead and launch that. Okay, we'll give everybody maybe just a couple more seconds here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close it. And it looks like only 25% said yes for having an EMR that can, determine your most profitable patients, and 75% no. So those are actually pretty interesting results. I do feel like when I started, I've got about 17 years of clinical experience. I started when all we had was paper charts, and that was very hard to document everything. And then as we, technology improved, we did start using electronic medical records. But even the electronic medical records early on did not capture the data that it captures now. So even for those that did say no, that you don't have a system that captures that, you may still be using an EMR system, but it's just still not capturing that data. So that's definitely something I think that we should strive in our EMRs to be able to deliver.
Yeah, I would agree. I think a lot of it is it's not looking at the individuals that have greater out-of-pocket expenditures, but the patients that have good on-time performance, the ones that are net promoters for the practice that, refer their friends and family, and you can attribute those types of behaviors to these patients. And as long as you have that information, much of these functions are not yet built out, but I think that as long as the practitioner has some electronic framework, they're going to be in a position where this is going to be enabled. Kind of like, if you buy a Tesla, even though the autopilot functions are not completely built out, you have that framework.
Okay, now you have previously suggested that doctors consider rating their patients, turning the tables on Google and Yelp. Can you describe what you mean and the value of doing this?
Yeah, so several years ago, I did a lot of writing for a review of optometric business, and one of the most widely read articles was something to the effect of should doctors rate their patients? And I think that struck a big nerve because generally speaking, doctors, it seems a little bit weird for them to be rated alongside of restaurants and hotels and whatnot. But the recognition is that patients have a lot of pent-up consumer demand for this information because this is high stakes to, find a physician for the benefit of their family and themselves. Whereas, if one goes to a restaurant and it's a bad restaurant, as long as they don't get sick, it's a relatively low stakes decision. So the idea is, even though patients can say whatever they want, they're protected by the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, which is basically the internet service providers and websites are not liable for what these individuals say. If you flip things around, doctors cannot, in a publicly visible forum, rate and review their patients because of HIPAA, unless they have a consent of their patients. But what I'm suggesting is that doctors can rate the patients similar for their own internal use for the business, similar to having an Uber rating for passengers. It creates a level of information and accountability, and this is done on many different levels. And the example that we'll delve into is just, on-time performance for the patient. When they schedule, are they going to, if they have a history of canceling, rescheduling, or no-showing, they should not be given opportunities to appoint again, to have a prime time appointment on a Saturday or an evening appointment.
Yeah, and kind of going back to my experience working in the field, when you first hear it saying rating your patients, it can be kind of like, whoo, I don't want to rate my patient. You feel like you're doing something bad, but if you think about it, it's really acceptable internally within the office. I remember I worked for a very prestigious LASIK practice. We had a lot of patients that were paying a large amount of money out of pocket for high level services. And this was also a corneal specialist. So we also had a lot of patients that were very complicated and really needed a lot of attention from the doctor to resolve and treat their issues. And so we had to create a system using the information that we were gathering from our EMR to make sure that these patients that were paying a lot of out-of-pocket expenses were receiving the correct treatment from us. So we made sure that when we scheduled all of our post-ops, they were, scheduled together. We weren't putting in complicated cases. And this isn't saying that you're not going to see your patients, that, oh, I can't have this patient come in because they're not very reliable. It's really just using the data, the analytics that we have to organize your schedule and to make scheduling decisions, in a better way. So you're not ignoring those patients that do take the time to pay and come in and show up on time. And even though you can't really, like Dr. Chu said, you can't go on Google or Yelp and say, hey, this patient's always late or no shows all the time. But in an office, you have to expect to do that because we also have patients going on Google and Yelp and saying, well, this doctor made me wait an hour to be seen. And so sometimes the doctors can't help it. It's they're giving the time that they need to their patients that are more complicated. So when you say rating your patients at first, it can sound a little bit intimidating, but in reality, you have to do that internally within your office so you can run a better business. And like Dr. Chu said, have referrals come in and make it more profitable. So having said that, let's do one more poll question. How many of you currently rate your patients? So let me go ahead and launch that one. Oh, sorry, one moment. Okay, so do you rate your patients? We'll just take a moment for you to answer that.
I practiced in Los Angeles. I was at UCLA, the Jules Stein Eye Institute, and also in another clinic. This was back in the day of paper charts. The folders would have silver or gold little star stickers, and the more stars, the more important and valuable the patient was. Often they were, celebrities or sports figures. And originally I had a problem with that because after graduating optometry school, being kind of idealistic, thought that, every single patient should get exceptional service rather than being given dibs to get taken back first and, the greater level of attention. But the realization is that, these are patients that disproportionately support the business. They fund donations for research and give publicity, and they really drive the existence of the practice. And that's the reality of how things operate.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's go ahead and close it. It looks like 33% say yes, they do rate their patients, and 67% say no. And kind of with what you were saying, Dr. Chu, where you had gold stickers, we would make notes in our EMR. The EMR I was using in clinic didn't really, it wasn't advanced enough to really, besides maybe some notes that we'd have to read, it didn't do more like a star or something that would, an organized way of rating. So we'll see what comes up in the future. There's some improvement in that documentation. Okay. Now, Dr. Chu, what do you think are the top line revenue drivers?
Yeah, so looking at profitability, top line revenue generation is relatively easy, and that's what we're going to kind of discuss here. And the main things, it's the number of patients that you see. Number two, it's the collections per patient. And then the final thing is kind of the frequency of visitation. Now, this is not to ignore the fact that the net revenue is probably the most important thing, but it gets a lot more complicated there, because when you're talking about net, you're having to look at cost of goods, how much you're paying for occupancy costs for your labor, and that gets kind of tricky. But with regards to the information that we capture from patient experiences and interactions, those can directly be used to drive top line revenue growth.
All great information. Can you provide an example of using patient data to keep the schedule full?
Right. So keeping the schedule full, that's really the job of the scheduling staff, and that directly ties into the first top line revenue generator, which is the number of patients seen. So if a patient in our practice, as an example, has a history of lots of reschedules at the last moment, cancellations, no-shows, that index shows up, and when our scheduling staff sees that, they're not going to offer the patient a prime time appointment. These patients will get put on our so-called priority call list, which is a euphemism for these patients will only get appointments if we have a space that opens up at the last minute and they can make it at the last minute to come in and to be seen. So it's really using data for informed scheduling purposes. And I feel that a lot of scheduling softwares, they don't really have a good index that is really easy to use for the staff. For example, there are certain systems where if the doctor is out of the office for a meeting or something and they have to reschedule the patient, it penalizes the patient's reliability index because it makes it look like it's the patient that canceled and had to reschedule. So there is some nuance there, but that's kind of an easy example. I'll give also as another example for keeping the books full, the first top line revenue generator. It's also trying to encourage patients to recommend their friends, family members, and coworkers. The low-hanging fruit has always been the patients that are in vision plans. Their whole family often they are on a vision plan. If they have eligibility for exam and product, that's a gold mine. It's a lot easier to mine internally for those patients as opposed to external marketing. So as an example, if you have in a survey a question about, were your family members offered an appointment or the opportunity to schedule when you booked your appointment, yes or no? And if you monitor that on a regular basis, you can incentivize your staff and give them financial incentives if there is a statistically significant increase in that. That can really drive behaviors and help to fill your books. And the final use of kind of data in this specific area is identifying the net promoters of your practice. That's to say, the patients that will disclose in a survey that they recommend your practice to somebody else, as opposed to the detractors or the those that are indifferent. But you can leverage the identification of the net promoters and solicit them to rate or review your office on Google, Yelp. Some of the patient communication softwares like DemandForce or Solution Reach and Patient Pop, they kind of have algorithms that cherry pick this to help encourage amplification of the message that the patients are very much behind in supporting your business. So these are some quick methods to draw and increase that top line factor of patients, new patients, and keeping your schedule full.
Those are all great. And actually, I've recently moved, and I'm just thinking about some of the, just not even in the eye field, but I don't think I ever remember any of my doctors or dentists that on my paperwork or ever asked me if I have family members that, would like to come in. And I think that's a really great, that's a great thing to add to paperwork, because that's just that more many people that, you could bring into the office. And most, in my opinion, most families like to stay together, when going to the doctors. That's a great tip. How about an example of increasing collections per visit?
So the average optometric practice derives collections significant amount based on the sale of product, glasses and contact lenses, and that's increasingly being challenged with erosion to online retailers. So this ties into the capture rate, the number of glasses sold per refraction. And I've found in my previous practices, my current practice is very specialized, but the previous two practices I had ownership interests in were more heavily involved in routine optometry. And one of the things that was very successful was just simply monitoring how many of our patients reported that they were offered the multiple sales savings on additional eyewear. And that's an easy way to increase capture rate is, you can have a capture rate, even though the industry average is about 65%, there are practices that actually can go beyond 100%. And their way to do that is through multiple sales per patient for glasses, sunglasses, near variable focus. And as long as you have a survey system set up, you often, as a clinician or a business owner, have to do this on your own. You ask the patients a question, were you offered the multiple sales eyewear pair savings? And you incentivize your staff to monitor that metric, because if you monitor the metric, that's the first step in making improvements in that direction. But that is a very powerful way of using data to increase the revenue per patient. If we're capacity constrained, then the clinician can start thinking about dropping the low reimbursing vision plans. If you have specific data as to the patient's collections, for a specific patient, and they're abnormally low because they always take and fill their prescription outside, those are patients that you can strategically put onto a 2-year recall, or in some cases not even put them onto your recall system. So that is one lever that is very powerful to drive the business, which is, when you encourage the patients to come back. And there are other things to increase revenue per patient, including just kind of the omni-channel approach of having an online store where you can have patients pre-shop for eyewear before they come into the office to streamline things. Encouraging in the exam room the kind of needs-based prescribing, the doctor-driven dispensing, which is in the confines of the exam room, which is medically oriented. Strong recommendation that the patient needs high index transitions or an anti-reflective treatment, as opposed to having the patient make these decisions under the sales pressure and kind of more retail environment of the optical, and having that strong handoff between the doctor, the patient, and the optician in the exam room. So that's known to increase capture rate and collections per patient. And then the final thing too, and this is kind of what I find is most exciting, and it mostly is future promise than present value. It's predictive analytics of knowing what a patient is going to do, perhaps even before they know what they're going to do. And the classic example is there was an article by Charles Duhigg in I think it was New York Times years ago, about how this teenage girl went into Target in Minnesota and bought seemingly random stuff like vitamins, cotton balls, and lotion. And Target felt that based on her purchase, there was a good chance that she was pregnant and sent her, I don't know, maternity coupons or something. And these coupons were intercepted by her dad, who was infuriated because he felt that, how can you send this stuff to my innocent daughter? So he went in and complained to the manager at Target, but he ate his own words because his daughter was indeed pregnant. So in a way, we can look at very simplistic predictions that we already know about, such as if we have a patient that is new to contact lenses or they've just had laser vision correction, we know that one of their first purchases is going to be a pair of sunglasses that's non-prescriptive. And to capture that by making sure that these patients are given timely communications at that time to intercept, to let them know that they can get eyewear from your practice. And if you're not doing it, I guarantee you that the online retailers, they're already using that data because, if somebody wears contact lenses, they already have a historical purchase frequency. Like, if somebody buys a 90 pack of single-use contact lenses for each eye, the strategic thing is to communicate with them in 90 days because there's a good likelihood that they are going to be back in the market. And you want to reach the patient at that time when they are amenable to the idea of repurchase. So that's probably the most interesting thing that we can start thinking about and communicating with our electronic medical record companies and patient communication softwares to develop those features that we need.
All fantastic information. I was also going to kind of go back a couple when you were talking in office and talking with patients and recommending, high index and other important things. One thing that we used to do is we had our optical shop at the very front of the office, and so if you have a scribe, it makes it a little bit easier, but if not, anybody really that's close or on the way out can do that, is walk the patient over to your optical shop, walk them over, introduce them to the optician, and kind of start that relationship so they don't feel it's just for a sale. Let's just go ahead, Mr. Smith, your glasses look like they just need to, be cleaned up or tweaked a little bit, not necessarily even have to purchase anything that day, but to make them feel like they're being taken care of. They have an optician. It's not just, like I said, a sale. And I think that relationship helps build trust in your office. And so they're going to be more likely to spend that money on their glasses with you. Okay, all great information. How does one increase patient frequency of visits? More specifically, a revenue generating visit.
Right. I think there are several things that can be done in that realm. Pre-appointing is very helpful. Using a robust recall system to get the patients back. And, if you don't have a robust recall system in place, your practitioner is definitely leaving revenue on the table. But most importantly, I think, is we have to reduce friction in making scheduling easy and efficient, and increasingly looking at things that we can do to allow online patient booking, or just things as easy and simple as possible. But if you can increase, if as an example, your contact lens wearing patient, on average, they're coming back every, say, 14 months. If you can get them to come back just 1 month earlier, you're going to automatically grow your practice by a significant amount. So that is a very important lever that is often overlooked.
Great information. And then can you describe your analogy of how growing a practice is like tending to a garden?
Yeah, the way that I look at things in, the time and attention in growing a practice very much is like gardening, where you have flowers and there's always the threat of weeds that you can't necessarily, in a garden, you can pull out the weeds and you can use Roundup, but you can't necessarily do that in a practice because the bad patients that are disrespectful, we had a patient a few months ago that shoplifted some product. Those are patients that you can discharge from the practice, but generally speaking, a lot of the patients that are not very much contributory to the practice, you can't kick out because it becomes very charged and fraught situation. But what you can do is not pour fertilizer and water and sunshine on them. You direct the development, the sunshine, the water, the fertilizer on the patients that are most pleasant, most profitable to the practice, and hopefully that crowds out the patients that are not supporting your practice, because you don't want a patient that just comes in for exams only and then purchases all their product outside to recommend all their friends and family and coworkers that share many of the same behavior traits. Otherwise, your practice will become overrun. And so that is where it's kind of like tending a garden, is you kind of have to know where to encourage growth and to guide it. You're kind of training the practice. And it is a little bit of an art. And it's not a hard and fast rule because, as an example, our practice has some patients that don't purchase product through the office, but we have a long-standing relationship. They're very pleasant, and it's not, there's a human element to things too that needs to be considered. And, we want to encourage that collectively. So that's where the practice is very much like a garden that needs tending.
That's great, great information there. Totally agree with that, with having worked for ophthalmologists and optometrists and optical shops for the time that I did. So I don't know if anybody has any questions they would like to type in the chat. If there's anything that we have discussed that you would like to kind of review or have a little bit more information on, please feel free. We'll give you a minute here to type in any questions you may have. And then just in case, if anybody does not want to type in our questions here, you can certainly, reach back out to us. If any of the viewers would like to know more about how our software, My Vision Express, can help their practice, please raise your hands using the Feature and Go To webinar, and then we'll be happy to contact you after the webinar. So we'll just give everybody just a minute here for any questions that may come up. And I think this is all really great information. And I think that it's a little bit of something that maybe offices and practices and people don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about, but I think it's very relevant. And especially these days with COVID and what it has done to our businesses, I think certainly this is something that you need to, give attention to. It's kind of like Dr. Chu said with tending to your garden, because if you don't, then, there will be no profit, and then there's no profit. It's going to be hard to run the business, of course, and, pay your good employees to run that business. So it looks like we don't have any questions coming in. Like I said, if you would like to send questions in after, you can certainly do so, and also raise hands, and then we'll be happy to contact you. Dr. Chu, is there anything else that you would like to discuss about the webinar as far as what we've covered?
One thing that came across my mind, you had mentioned the importance of the patient handoff between the doctor and the optician. And even though that can be done in the optical, within my own practice, my encouragement has always been to have that occur within the doctor's exam room, where it is kind of more of a medical type setting. And the way to do that is, my previous two practices had these visual paging systems, which were very expensive, over $10,000 because of all the wiring and these units that required, running wires. But now, all the clinicians, you can just buy on Amazon a $20 wireless doorbell to notify your designated optician when it is time for them to come into the exam room. And that's huge. That is something I feel that is underused. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. You have to have the adequate staffing to pull this off. But it's a very simple and powerful way to have adherence and encourage the patients to fulfill what your recommendations are.
That's great. I've not heard that before. I don't think we were staffed as well because we really only had the one optician, and so she had to stay in the optical shop, where people were coming and going. But that's a great tool to use. Do you think there's anything an EMR could have, or do you prefer it just to be, a one button hit so you're not sitting typing with the patient there?
Right. Certainly, if the electronic medical records, there are certain systems that I've seen that that can be used for notifying another office member to come into the exam room or what to do, but that is contingent that they are sitting directly in front of that workstation. So there is some benefit of having the immediacy of some system which is independent on the optician being in front of a workstation.
Yeah.
But I know that other clinicians, I even spoke with one that I think he had some device that made a chirping noise, kind of like a cricket, and used that as a notification system. But there's no right or wrong, but I think that this is, something that I feel has worked very well for a lot of practices to encourage a very strong handoff between the doctor and the ancillary staff member.
I have a question here that might be helpful. Some of our patients obviously are not going to be as tech savvy, so they're not going to be as not able to understand, maybe, I guess a lot of people have email now, but maybe the texting or social media or recall systems where they're maybe more traditional paper announcements or letters or recalls, postcard. How do you see, or how would you recommend letting them feel that they're also, very valuable if they do come in and do spend a lot of money on and do come in on time? Is there anything that you'd recommend as far as capturing those patients?
Right. Like my staff are upfront with our patients that have a history of cancellations, no-shows, rescheduling at the last minute, that we do monitor this. And that often sets some level of decorum in their behavior to respect our time. And so that's something that I think that we can be very upfront with. As far as, out-of-pocket expenditures, that gets a little bit trickier because, like our office, we do not want to refuse service, certainly for somebody that is unable financially to, spend to purchase something. So that gets a little bit trickier. And as clinicians, we still have a fiduciary responsibility to do the best thing for our patients. So it is balanced a little bit more, as opposed to the traditional retailer that just wants to sell and maximize profitability. We want to do it in a responsible manner that is respectful of the patient and their own agency.
Great feedback. Let's see, anything else that you could think of that would benefit our viewers as far as increasing profitability in your office?
Just to kind of recap is that, there are a number of interactions that a patient has with our business that fall outside of what we would document for examination. Instead of like documenting the visual acuity, the refraction and all that stuff, we have documentation on their expenditures, whether they purchased glasses or contact lenses through us, how many patients, friends, or family members that they have referred into our practice, what they think of our practice based on surveys that have been conducted. If they are net promoters, which is this, for the benefit of the audience, is basically the standard question in surveys is, would you recommend our practice to somebody else? And you give them a scale of 0 to 10. If they respond 9 or 10, those are your net promoters. The detractors respond from 6 to below, and those in between are indifferent. So you take the percentage of net promoters and you subtract the net detractors. That's your net promoter score. And the kind of the highest level you can get is 100. In the best like companies like Google, PayPal, Amazon, Apple, they're in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And historically, like the internet service providers and cable companies are much hated. They're much lower. And you take the very best net promoters and you have them amplify the message of your practice to their networks. And so these are all things that you can monitor, and there's data to back it up. Their repurchase frequency, the collections per patient, their history and on-time reliability for making appointments. And that's the data that you use to determine who you're going to tend to in your practice and give your time and attention, because your time and attention is finite. Just like if you're gardening, you have a finite amount of water, fertilizer, and time and attention. So you direct that to the very best patients. You're not going to direct that time and energy to encouraging somebody that disrespects your practice. Now, I think any clinician in the beginning, you have to start the relationship with giving the patients, the benefit of the doubt and welcoming them and expecting the very best in behaviors. But you also have to protect your practice's best interests too.
Yep, definitely great feedback. Would you say, so the patients that do answer on the survey, a 6 or below, would you say that you try to investigate why they did that? Do your surveys have that information on there so you can understand if it was something, that could have been done better when they came in?
Right. So surveys are very interesting because for net promotion, the net promoter score, that is really only useful, in my opinion, for marketing. It can sometimes be helpful if you do root cause analysis, if there's a problem to identify where in the practice are operational deficiencies. But that gets very tricky because, as an example, if your net promoter score goes from 1 month from a 60 down to 30, question number 1 becomes, is that a real statistically significant decrease, or is it just due to chance variation? If you're somehow able to determine that that is a real measurable significant difference, then it's kind of like, well, where in your practice do you even start looking to know where the problem is? So if somebody is using a survey instrument strictly for the purpose of trying to make improvements as opposed to marketing, you have to ask task-specific questions, such as asking the patient, were you immediately acknowledged upon coming into the office, yes or no? Because then if you know that there's a statistically significant decrease in responses from 1 month to another, you know exactly who in the practice to go to have a discussion, and that's, you know, the person at the front desk. So Net Promoter Score, in my view, it's more for marketing purposes as opposed to operational changes.
That's a great response on that. That helps, I think, with understanding surveys as well. We probably just have a few more minutes left. Let's see if there's any questions. We don't have any questions as of yet. Let's see if there's anything else we can touch upon before ending our webinar. Let's take a look here. And do you feel, since COVID, do you feel that your practice has come back, you know, from being shut down or being restricted to how many patients were coming in? Do you feel that you have kind of bounced back from that?
Certainly, yeah. I think that most practices have rebounded very strongly. There are certainly still headwinds with respect to inflation. You know, all the major contact lens companies have announced that they're increasing their pricing, and you know, obviously, many of my colleagues, I think, are looking for new hires and employees, and so these just kind of underscore the importance of keeping attention on driving profitability.
Definitely agree. Okay, and let's see, anything else that we want to touch on before ending our webinar here in just a few minutes? What system do you currently use? You had mentioned that previously in a different practice you had, you know, gold stars for your most profitable patients. Is there a specific way that you do that currently?
Right. So there are ways to subjectively rate patients, and I know of some old-time clinicians on paper records. They would write statements on the corner of an exam record, such as VIP for very irritating patient, or PITA, which is pain in the ass patients. And you know, that I feel is a bit inappropriate. I feel that the ratings should be more objective, based on you know, the metrics that we collect based on the patient experiences, the interactions that they have, and to be sure, all the online retailers, they're already doing that. They're measuring how long it takes for somebody to actually complete the purchase. If they leave stuff in the online shopping cart, the more sophisticated ones will notify the prospective purchasers that you know, they left something in their cart, whether you'd like to complete the purchase, and maybe give a call to action. So my emphasis is, I feel that we need to be careful about subjective ratings, because that can lead into some problems and some discrimination. My suggestion is more objective measurements as a starting point. And again, these are things that I feel that a lot of the electronic medical records are not yet built out on doing this, but moving forward, because we've already gotten some of the basic functionality with meaningful use and that stuff out of the way, practitioners, private practitioners, we need the electronic backbone of our practices to support what we want to drive the business, is to be able to compete with the online retailers and other, attempts to take over control of our relationship that we have with our patients.
Yep. All great data there. Well, I think then if there's no any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up our webinar. Like I said, if you do have some questions, maybe you'd like to send in later, you can raise your hand using the feature in the GoToWebinar, or if you would like to be contacted about how My Vision Express can help your practice be more profitable, just please let us know. We'll be happy to reach out. So Dr. Chu, thank you so much for your time and your valuable input, and thank you all who have attended our webinar today, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.